Okay. How are we looking? Mic check.
Mic check.
Are we actually coming through the Yeti here? Are we actually coming through the Yeti here?
Are we coming through the Yeti?
Yes. Okay.
All right.
All right, buddy. So we tried to set up we tried to set up a fancier audio setup, and we were foiled by lack of battery and lack of cable.
Yeah, we're missing some pieces, but we'll get it together.
At a certain point, we might actually be able to get up off the floor. That'd be kind of cool.
Yeah.
So today is the 12th of December.
No, 20th.
The 20th of December. That's how the days work. It's 3:43 p.m.
3:43.
And a little bit of reference for this one. We just finished watching the CSGO Intel Extreme Masters.
Yeah, man.
The last big tournament of 2020. I've been watching esports for a very long time.
Right.
I've seen many different Intel Extreme Masters over the years.
Yeah.
They've been held in different games. I first watched them in StarCraft 2. And that sort of got us talking about video games in general.
Yeah.
And modern video games and old video games and what we play and what we don't play. And
Yeah, we were like, let's just record a conversation about it.
let's get something down. So you just picked up the hot game of 2020.
Yeah, man.
Cyberpunk 2017.
Cyberpunk 2020. Yeah, 2077. So this game, it'll be interesting looking back, but this game was one of the most hyped games I've seen or come around in a while. It was promising a lot of things. It was an open world. It is an open world game, set in a futuristic night city that's like a future Los Angeles, and it features open world system, carjacking, it's vertical environments, tons of interesting stuff, human body modifications, all that good stuff. And it was hyped up. Keanu Reeves is famously in the game and did a lot of publicity for it.
You're wonderful.
You're wonderful. Exactly. You're all magnificent, or whatever it was. So he's become a bit of a meme. But the game flopped as it was released just 2 days ago on Friday. December 18th, it was pulled from the Sony stores, pulled off the PS5 shelves because it was just too buggy. So we were talking a little bit about that, and I wanted to start asking you to sort of lead into it, like, what are the expectations that people have about games that maybe they didn't have when we were growing up and playing them as younger people?
Yeah, I mean, games are mainstream these days in a way that they just weren't. I never really. So I've always engaged with the gaming community in sort of a distance kind of way.
Right.
Like you, I grew up and all I really had was my Mac laptop.
Yeah, same.
So, and I never owned any consoles. My parents really weren't into that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
But especially as the YouTube era of gaming came about, that was sort of a way for me to interact with this community and to interact with gaming as a whole,
Right.
In a way that let me sort of get access to these games, even though I wasn't playing most of them.
Right.
And of course, there was other standard things like playing video games in people's houses.
Yeah, going over and
But
hanging out
yeah, exactly.
with the kids whose parents did let them have consoles.
Exactly.
I feel that.
And then getting horribly beaten by people who actually know how to use a controller.
Exactly.
Good times.
Oh man.
But I at the same time, that meant that I was engaged with video games in a slightly different way.
Right.
But still had access to a huge amount of games and experienced huge amounts of games, just not actually in the driver's seat for a lot of them.
Yeah.
And as time went on, there are some games that I've caught up with in the past. There are some games that I played in university. I played a lot more on controller because my roommates had systems, and you could just play games.
Definitely.
So that was my first real bout of sort of regular experience with a controller. And we really thought then that we were seeing sort of the end of the console era. And certainly the way people are interacting with games now has changed radically.
Right, yeah.
So we're dealing previously with a fairly small, close-knit community.
Right.
Where there are different genres of games, but people are a lot less genre specific in the old days, just because you really, unless you were dedicated to playing a single game, you really couldn't be.
Right.
So to set up the stage for people who are less familiar with how we got to where we are now in the United States with games like Cyberpunk 2077 being released.
Right.
The gaming has gone mainstream, but it's also really started to splinter.
Yeah.
So the people who are interested, like games that really excite large player bases in different parts of gaming culture, seem to be fewer and fewer. So the sort of crossover success of something like Cyberpunk is pretty rare. And to see it get released and be incredibly buggy and not really get to sort of, people just aren't as pumped now because the game seems to have a lot of issues.
Yeah, exactly.
But this is something that's happened again and again over the last 5 years or something.
Right.
Top AAA titles or big games get a lot of hype. They get released, and people are furious that either the game's expectations aren't delivered on at all. A big example of that would be No Man's Sky.
Right.
Or they're just incredibly buggy.
Right. Exactly.
And with the amount of money that's in the industry, and with the fact that these bugs are so prevalent, like people are just playing the game.
Yeah.
And things are going wrong.
Yeah. It's not like you have to look for it, and something. It's not like the glitches in the old days where you could go, and glitches were kind of fun because you could break the game a little bit.
Like because in games there's always been a level of engagement.
Yeah.
Right? If you go off the beaten path and if you mess around in a game, chances are for 3D games you're going to be able to break something.
Yeah, exactly.
It's the standard sort of, where I'm running around the world interacting with things in a normal way.
Yeah.
And yet cars are exploding, things are flipping up and flying everywhere. Yeah. Oh, how can this happen?
People are passing through walls when they shouldn't be. And I think there's one really funny clip, because it's been a whole phenomenon now of YouTube compilations of Cyberpunk, featuring many memes of Keanu Reeves, of course. But one that was really funny was a guy flips a radio station and completely flies off the Night City freeway into a giant skyscraper for no particular reason. In slow-mo, of course.
Well, you gotta get that slow-mo.
You gotta get that slow-mo. So, yeah, exactly. But it's frustrating when it's stuff that, as you were saying, the game industry should have figured out by now. Basic stuff. It's been done a lot, and it's just, not connecting when people actually hit the ground.
And physics engines are hard.
Yeah.
And partly that, like, there is a lot of pressure on game developers to get out games that are of a certain quality and that have a certain number of features in them.
Right.
And there's like a hype line.
Yeah.
So the way, let's set things up. So the U.S. market is kind of special in games, and has been for quite a while now. The U.S. they're the big game guy. They make games. There are other places that are in the game as well too. But it's the U.S. that builds AAA titles. Right. They produce AAA games, and they sell AAA games to U.S. consumers, and then also to other regions as well.
Right, exactly.
But in America, there's this real culture of getting on top of the most recent game, of playing the most recent games, of there being sort of this continuity in AAA titles. You get in, you play these certain games, you get out, and that was built off of basically blockbuster successes.
Yeah.
There are these great games that were released that people were incredibly excited about. Like I remember like Halo 3 when I was in middle school setting records for the number of people pre-ordering it and that sort of thing.
People were so ready for Halo 3, yeah.
Like you had to be on these games, you know. If you were a gamer, you know, that sort of stuff broke through. It was the early things that broke through into the mainstream.
Right.
You know, all of a sudden, like my parents were aware, like not only that video games existed, but that there was a big event occurring in game culture.
Exactly.
You know, like you have mainstream.
And in Call of Duty, Modern Warfare was one of those moments that my folks became aware of, because it was really, you know, Call of Duty shifted into the modern era. Basically, you know, my folks kind of heard about it because it's, you know, one part of the storyline is you go to a fictional Middle Eastern country where there are indeed weapons of mass destruction as the U.S. So the invasion that you help with is justified. So it's a very kind of political game. But it was just, you know, I remember just there being like a lot of controversy.
Sure,
you know?
And then the Modern Warfare 2 was
especially Modern Warfare 2 because of that particular mission.
Because there's a level where you massacre people in an airport.
Yeah.
And these are things. This controversy in games is something that, to me, so often is just kind of manufactured and out there.
Right.
Like there's no way that I think Trinity Ward, I can't remember. Maybe
Infinity Ward.
Infinity Ward or Treyarch, I can't remember which one put out Modern Warfare 2.
Yeah, I think it was Treyarch, but I'm not sure. It could have been. Yeah.
You know, there's no way they get that level onto the storyboard and go, you know, this isn't going to make a storm.
Right.
So, like I see that sort of stuff, and I see public baiting. I see media baiting.
Oh yeah.
And that, you know, at this stage we've. That sort of thing still kind of happens, but in weird ways.
Yeah.
So the most recent one I remember is in Battlefield 1. It is called Battlefield 1, right? That's hella confusing.
Was it the
most recent one?
Oh yeah, the World War II one.
Yeah. So in that Battlefield game there was controversy because they had like a female soldier or something, and people were all like, but there weren't female soldiers or something. And it was just, you know,
even though of course there were.
It's just this stuff is just dumb.
Yeah, exactly. I would have thought the controversy came from the fact that in Battlefield 1 you actually play a campaign as a German tank commander.
Yeah, but you know, people have done that before.
Right. But kind of to the point where it's not in a multiplayer level. It's not, it's an actual whole storyline you can follow. That to me was just interesting, you know, where you empathize with the characters and stuff like that, and puts you in their shoes and makes them, it humanizes them, which is really interesting, you know. Like based on kind of what the Call of Duty games were that we were growing up with, you know, where you just are shooting hordes of Germans or Japanese and they're the most awful people.
Yeah, or Middle Easterners.
Or Middle Eastern, exactly.
And that was one of my mother's critiques at one point. I was playing, what is it? Time Crisis.
Oh yeah.
Time Crisis 3, I think.
Yeah.
In England with friends of the family, and the mother of the kids professional in international relations and academic, but she's into games.
Right.
My mother's really not. And she says, you know, she turned this woman at some point, like, you know, they're shooting like Middle Easterners.
Yeah,
like, how is this? Like, how does this gel with, you know, your progressive, normal human being international relations standpoint on things? And the answer is, you know, it's a game.
Yeah.
You know, the reason these tropes make their way into games is because you only have so much time to set up an objective, and you're selling your game to middle and upper class white people.
Yeah.
You know, you put people in a game, you want them to know exactly what to do.
No, exactly.
You want people responding quickly. You want people to have a good experience in the game. And I think as time has gone by, we've gotten perhaps a little better at not making things so cut and dry.
Yeah. I remember one of the more recent Call of Duty games actually had you kind of fighting alongside would be considered like one of the many factions that the U.S. is supporting in the Middle East right now. It was unclear exactly where.
Yeah,
but it was like you actually were fighting alongside people who looked like the people that in previous games you killed.
And then I think it's good that games have made an effort to do that sort of thing.
Yeah, it's really important.
I think part of it is, video games themselves. One of the things that wasn't undoubtedly obvious to my mother, because she just doesn't play games like this, that is obvious to people who play games, is that these days especially, what you do in a video game has become very standardized.
Yeah.
So down to stuff like your controls.
Right.
Like back when I started playing video games, some games you played with WASD, and some games you played with arrow keys.
Right, exactly.
Something as basic as that.
Yeah.
There were even games with funkier control schemes. Right. These days, you're really hard-pressed to find games where you're not using WASD.
Yeah, exactly.
Even in games where you're not using WASD to control their characters, having the hand in that position in the keyboard has become such a staple that people are playing things like League of Legends, which are using QWER.
Right.
They're in the exact same part of the keyboard.
Right.
So the way you interact with games has sort of been standardized on the most basic level.
Right. Exactly. It's interesting. It is interesting. And we were talking as well about how, back when we were younger, games could come along and break the mold in a really interesting way. Like Minecraft we were talking about. Do you want to speak a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, the breaking the mold, like the way, there's a lot of different. So Minecraft is, we talking about Minecraft, and I was pointing out that Minecraft now has basically become a radically different game.
Right. From when it started.
From when it started.
Yeah.
And not in a sort of progressive way almost, but in a way sort of at a certain point like a switch was flipped.
Yeah.
And the very basis of the game suddenly changed.
Right.
And the reason for that is when you first started playing Minecraft, when I first played the beta Minecraft back in the day, beta Minecraft was around for years and years, before they actually released the thing. When I was playing beta Minecraft, you had no end game.
Right.
There was no ultimate goal.
Right.
Period. There were you really were sort of released into this world.
Right.
And if you hadn't seen what to do, you had no idea what to do.
Right.
And I got into Minecraft the way many other people did, and by watching videos on the internet.
Same, yeah. That's how I learned about it, yeah.
And those videos, one of the things that's clever about the way Minecraft works is a lot of the stuff that is challenging in the game is visual.
Right.
So we talked about WASD. Minecraft uses WASD.
Right.
So you have that basic level of game knowledge. You hop into Minecraft, you're able to move around.
Right.
One of the other super standard things is left click in video games is interact.
Right.
In general. For shooters, it's shoot your gun, and then often you have another button that does other interactive
your
things.
other mouse button is aiming or something like that.
Yeah, and then you have like an F to use things or E to use things. Exactly.
Super standard.
Super standard. Yeah. And in Minecraft, if you got into a game, you could use the left button to interact, but if you hadn't seen any gameplay, you wouldn't be able to pull up the inventory so easily.
Right.
And the inventory is sort of where Minecraft becomes Minecraft.
Right.
All of a sudden, once you go into that screen, you have the ability to manipulate all these things you've gathered, and you have what's called a crafting system, which has become now a huge part of games.
Definitely.
So, people couldn't take from Minecraft the world so much because it was sort of what the Minecraft was built on.
Exactly.
And, you could make a Minecraft clone by copying that aspect, but the feature that they could actually steal out of the game was crafting.
Right, exactly.
So now crafting is in every game.
Definitely.
But to get back to the sort of branch that occurred in Minecraft, like that sort of division, like when you're thrown into a world and you have nothing to do, versus when you're thrown into the world and sure, that old game still in theory exists inside Minecraft.
Right.
You can still just go do whatever you want. But there's an end game now. There are objectives now.
Yeah.
that changes the deal.
Yeah.
Because I can go into any game and, in theory, do whatever I want.
Right. But when there's objectives, you're going to follow the objectives. You're going to want to win. You're going to want to achieve something.
Yeah.
That's kind of how we've been cultured to play games.
And in a way, like, game community is, there are good parts to it and there are bad parts to it. But a basic aspect of it is, hey man, did you play this game?
Yeah.
And if the answer is yes, the follow-up question is almost always, did you beat that game?
Exactly.
And these aren't like these things can be taken as hostile questions,
right?
But in reality, they're just engagement questions.
Yeah, exactly.
Did you play this game?
It's like, did you watch the whole movie?
Exactly. Did you? Well, I mean,
can I talk to you about the ending of the game? If
Yeah, totally.
I don't want to spoil anything for you.
For movies, obviously, it's one of the things we were talking about that makes AAA games so challenging is because the analogs are difficult to see. Like, what's the analog to playing a game?
Right.
Because movies, it's not that movies are shorter. It's that with a movie, you sit down and you watch.
Yeah, exactly.
That's all you can do. Same sort of deal with a book. Did you read the book? Did you finish the book? Finishing the book is the ultimate objective of basically every book.
Right.
There are books that you can pick through.
And there's reference books. But if you're reading something and you enjoy it, you're probably going to finish it.
Exactly.
Yeah. Hopefully.
Whereas with games, sort of evaluating an individual's experience. So if you read a book and you finish it,
right,
that usually is an indicator that you enjoyed the book.
Right.
Right. If you don't finish it,
you didn't.
That's often an indicator.
You didn't enjoy it. Yeah.
A lot of people finish books they don't care that much for, but in general, when people are enjoying books, you kind of assume that they make it to the end.
Yeah.
The same is not true of video games. Like, I've played a lot of video games I enjoyed, didn't make it through.
Right.
Partly that's because of the time it takes.
Yeah.
Video games have a lot of sort of artificial barriers that they throw in your way.
Right.
And video games these days are sort of purpose-built, designed to keep you inside of their worlds.
Yeah, and I think a lot of them thrive on the fact that they're never ending. I know people still play Skyrim, for example.
Right.
And people are still creating content, creating whole missions, whole quest lines, different locations, different characters for Skyrim. And part of the reason why I jump back every now and then into Skyrim is to see, okay, what's new. They had Patrick Stewart, do the voice of one of these quests in one of the major characters in these quest lines that this fan spent however many countless hours creating, for example.
Right. The modding community, like video game publishers have undoubtedly noticed that if you make games and you allow them to be modded and you set up the right conditions and your game is a success,
exactly,
then you end up with longevity. And you have to be an idiot not to notice that Bethesda spotted that and that they've tried to capitalize on it. They've released new versions of Skyrim. They've released Skyrim for VR.
Skyrim for the Switch.
Skyrim for Switch. I don't even want to know how many years after that game was made that it's being released for a modern console. And I don't actually have a problem with people re-releasing old games for new tech. But it does, it's one of the things that sets up standards and expectations for people when they're trying to make AAA games, when they're trying to make hot new games. And these days, it's been hard for studios to crack through. We were talking about indie games a little bit. Like, there are indie games that have made their way through into the mainstream. It's really rare. There are an unbelievable amount of indie games and indie game developers now. That's the way things go when you get some success.
Definitely.
And it's not really fair to compare AAA game brands to indie games.
Exactly.
But then the question is, of course, like, how is it that they're still messing things up so badly? And do they? Because Cyberpunk 2077 you try to play it a little bit on your computer.
Yeah. Now, to be fair, like it was a little buggy, but my machine is a 2017 PC model. It's a laptop as well, so it's kind of limited in its specs. And I was assuming that it would not play very well, but it's the fact that people have amazing PCs, state of the art PCs, and the game is just fucking with them. That is really frustrating. You know?
That's a different standard.
Yeah, and I think Cyberpunk is interesting because they really, as you said, they kind of promised all of these standards in games. They put their own spin on them, but they kind of really tried to create a sort of persona or culture around the game of itself. They created mini documentaries, podcasts. They created a fictional band. They brought, movie stars and popular musicians into the actual game world. They really tried to make it a big kind of cultural event that sort of blurred the lines between fiction and reality. At least that's what I felt I was being advertised when I bought the game.
Games are trying to capitalize on moments.
Exactly.
It's the two-sided coin of what we're talking about with mods with Bethesda and Skyrim is, unless your game is set up to make money off of a player the more they play it, something like World of Warcraft, something with a monthly subscription fee, you don't get money per hour.
Right.
You get money when a new game is released.
Yeah.
In a way, having a game, like the idealistic scenario, as awful as it sounds for AAA game developers, is something like Evolve.
Yeah.
Right? A game that came out, was big for a couple weeks, and absolutely imploded.
Right.
Right? But had $100 pre-order.
Right.
Right? For like special things. And they came out with promise after promise. We're going to do this, we're going to do that.
Yeah.
It's going to be great.
Right.
And then the game releases, and there is traction behind it. There was a ton of streaming of it early on.
Right.
And then the developer picks up the cash it's made, and they already what's their incentive to improve the game?
No, exactly.
If it's released and it's made a bundle of bucks.
Exactly.
You're in this really weird scenario with AAA games where they want you to be on a game for a certain amount of time. They want you to get bored and move on.
Yeah.
The only games that really want you to keep playing are, battle royale games. There's things like Magic the Gathering that we play. Yeah. Things that have sort of progression strapped into them.
Right.
There's always going to be a new Magic set as long as Wizards of the Coast.
You're always gonna, if you want to leg up, you can always buy gems. If you want to play, competitively in Magic the Gathering arena.
And they know that for those sorts of games, the more time you put into it, the more likely it is you're going to dump some
buy
cash
something.
in it.
Yeah, and I've dumped a bit. I've dropped probably $30 in MTG arena.
Yeah, I put $20 in myself.
Yeah, exactly.
Just because I wanted to accelerate my beginning process a little bit, and and sometimes I wanted to draft at a particular point,
right?
And
you need some gems to do that or whatever,
right? And I think I'm pretty good at being responsible with this stuff, and at this point, I'm a pretty strong Magic player, and I've got a decent enough bank, and I just don't play that often.
Yeah, exactly.
So I should be able to skirt the payments for the rest of the MTG.
No, exactly. And
Magic, most people aren't like that.
No, exactly. And Magic's fascinating because, it's such a community-based game because it's a physical card game and you go to certain places to play it.
Right.
And that's not possible anymore.
That's not possible right now because of the virus. But one of the terrifyingly sad things is the sort of community that we grew up in around Magic, around these local game stores, is kind of really screwed over by these super cheap, super accessible products.
Yeah, exactly.
I like playing Magic in person. I like drafting real cards.
Right.
Drafting is kind of my thing. I prefer that to most other ways of playing Magic.
Yeah.
I have way less. Obviously, it's less even about the choices.
Right.
The choices, in the old days, you had your local game store or maybe Magic Online.
Right.
And that was it. Magic Online in those days was barely a competitor for your local game store.
No, exactly.
But, at our local game store, we could go and the prize pools were good enough that if you did really well, you could win yourself another draft.
No, exactly. And the whole idea was as well that it's pretty affordable for a high school kid to do as well.
Well, it's affordable, and if you feel like you're a good player, it's important to draw. If you want a good community, you want good players,
right?
Because good players are going to have invested more time into the game,
right?
As a general rule. So in order to attract good players and actually get them interacting face-to-face in a good community, you need to offer them a reward for playing in that place.
Right, exactly.
And for me, I like drafting, so the best reward is more drafting.
Yeah, exactly.
But now that you have something like Arena, and now that Magic Online has so much better for drafting stuff, you're in Arena, you're drafting for free.
Yeah.
I'm drafting for free.
Right.
And I'm winning drafts back.
Right.
And in theory, like I've paid $30. These days that's basically less than 2 real life drafts.
Exactly.
Something like Arena stomps out these local game stores.
Yeah.
It means that they no longer, and it's a vicious cycle, because previously they were in a position where they could offer drafts because they could be like, where you go to draft. You Definitely. Come here to draft. We have sort of a gateway on it.
Yeah.
Now people have 2 other good options, both of which are cheaper.
Exactly. And I think as well as, culturally, and the virus has only accelerated this, we're getting more accustomed to finding our communities online, to finding games like Magic more easily accessible online. We're getting used to that being a stand-in for going and playing in real life. And I remember, just to bring it back to us personally, to add a personal touch to it, we had just moved to the neighborhood a little over a year ago now, back in September, a year and a quarter ago, and we found Farside, which was a bar that was right at Girard and Broadview, a 15-minute walk from where we live, and we found out that they did Commander nights. So Commander, we'll talk more in our Magic episode, but Commander is a particular format of Magic that is a multiplayer format. Yeah, so, we both went. I think I played a little bit more than you did, but we both went, and it was really interesting because we were just kind of breaking into the scene. It was a new format. For me, and I was just kind of breaking into the scene, getting to know the people face to face, establishing a bit of a rapport. And then, I was getting really excited about the format, and then the virus hits and it all collapses. Right? And that's just kind of a microcosm for, I think, people who were getting in. I've been playing Magic a long time, but it was been a while since I played with people. But if people are just getting in, right, and they, either have just kind of tasted the community aspect and don't know what they're missing, or are coming in without that personal interaction, why there's no nostalgia for it in the same way as there's the nostalgia for us. Like, we know what that was like, Totally. We know what it was like to go and hang out and do a draft with people. People online just entering the game don't, right?
That's a really good sort of microcosm for the struggles with gaming as a whole.
Yeah.
Gaming is having a sort of an identity problem.
Yeah.
What's a AAA title look like? It looks like a mash of all these different game genres in a one.
Exactly.
And that's partly, that's partly the fault of successful games.
Right.
You have games like Uncharted, which nailed mashing a bunch of game things together. Right. But you in any sort of mainstream big money making enterprise, there's a lot of copy paste.
Right.
They see something successful, they try to do it themselves.
Yeah.
But the difference with gaming is, your costs for AAA games are through the roof.
Yeah.
You need to have some level of success with your game.
Right.
In order to keep your company alive.
Right.
what are you going to do? Are you going to take risks, or are you going to try and reskin new things? Are you going to, there's no way, to come back to the Cyberpunk thing again, there's no way that they didn't know the game was buggy on release.
Yeah.
But they put it out anyway.
They put it out anyway.
Because they could not afford to miss their moment.
No, exactly. And they'd already delayed it, and they were like, we got to go for it. Yeah.
You know what? You go to the team. You're like, how long is it going to take this to fix? A year. We're putting it out.
Yeah.
We'll fix it in a year, maybe.
Yeah.
And that as somebody who, and this is something that, it's funny because I'm not, you're more of a mainstream gamer dude
Definitely.
than I am.
Yeah.
But as somebody who's not into that stuff so much, it's a disincentive.
Yeah, totally.
You hear about these things happening and you go, we think the best way to play modern AAA games without a doubt is to build a good PC.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's, in between, you can get by under $500.
Right.
But really, if you're looking for something solid that's going to run things smoothly, you're looking between $500 and $1,000.
Right.
Not that much money as far as tech goes,
right.
to be brutally honest.
Yeah.
But that's still a big entry fee.
Yeah, exactly.
Then you're looking to buy AAA games, you're looking for another $200, $300, $400, $500 a year just on games.
Yeah, if you want to get them all, all the good titles.
If you want to get them and play them.
Exactly.
So, and it's an expensive hobby, and that's not the worst thing in the world, but there seems to be, one of the reasons that I feel like things are in a bit of crisis now is because, we have so much access to what people are playing and, video of games and stuff. We have all this access to information about these games. When they don't come off well, everybody knows instantly.
Exactly.
Right? If you just missed the date that Cyberpunk 2077 dropped, then you woke up the next morning inundated with information about how it was covered in bugs.
Right.
That's not good.
No.
And I it's hard to side with AAA game developers because a lot of them are kind of scummy, but you can see how that's the sort of thing that stifles creativity.
Yeah, exactly.
And like a Battlefront, remember the new Battlefront series? Yeah. Both of those games dropped, hugely buggy in silly ways.
Right.
They fixed them eventually, kind of. But by then, you've missed your spike.
Right.
You
missed your opportunity because it's all about the landing, right? All the hype, all of the delays, all of the, intensity and anticipation you're instilling on people, and that way it's really cinematic. You've been hyping this up as a very cinematic, like a movie, like the new Star Wars movie or whatever it is, the new blockbuster that's coming out. It's got to land,
Yeah. So I guess. Sorry to keep interrupting, but the thing that's striking me now is that one of the big things is the sort of, for each particular game, the novice versus the experienced players. And who do you build games for? Well, in a world where everything's a spike, you're building for novices.
Yeah.
You're forced to.
Yeah.
But if you build for novices, your games spark out, and you don't end up with any experienced players.
Right.
That there was a resurgence in the last year of Halo Reach.
Wow. Interesting.
Right?
Because people are looking for that kind of experience.
Because it's still pretty modern.
Yeah.
It's still modern enough to run on consoles and the stuff
still
that people
looks
have.
Good, yeah. But
still looks good enough, and it's withstood the test of time long enough.
Well, and that's why, I think it's really interesting that kind of you have these games that have just been able to last and stay. And, one thing, that's why I was really excited about Cyberpunk 2077, because they did the Witcher series, and they did the Witcher 3 5 years ago now.
Yeah, and the Witcher 3 is really stuck it out.
It's really stuck it out. So I was looking, I think there is that sense of track record means something, right? And then you see them fumble and lose it. It's man, all of that kind of goodwill that they built up with people interested in CD Projekt Red, all of the sort of the culture that had emerged around CD Projekt Red is something I follow as like a really sort of meticulous, well-crafted, really ethical in terms of how they wanted to respond to the player audience development project. Like, is that all gone out the window now? Can that be
does it die because the game's buggy on release?
Yeah, exactly. You know, considering this is like what they put out, it took them 5 years to put this game out. You know. And it promised so much. So that's kind of interesting. Like, is that, and then goes back to what you're talking about with like Evolve, right? Like, is it better just to like put something out? Yeah, you know, that you get an instant reward and then you don't have to follow up, and you get a bunch of angry people, but there's so many other games they can choose from. They'll forget about it, right? And go pick up something else off the shelf.
For me, the thing that's fascinating about games is this sort of idea of what the end game is.
Right.
So, you know, and I mean that in terms of both the end game inside the actual game, and then the end game also outside the game.
Yeah, where is this going? Yeah.
You know, so you know, with multiplayer games, the end game seems to be for a lot of people to make an esport.
Yeah.
Because if you produce an esport, you have this like external momentum that just keeps things running.
Right.
If people are still playing the game at a professional level, professional players pour tens of thousands of hours into your game. They produce content.
Right.
People absorb that content, and that gives them a way to constantly sort of engage with this game a little bit.
Exactly.
Giving you the opportunity to drag people back into the game.
Like, what, you know, however many countless people are watching Counter-Strike, for example.
Exactly.
You know, and it's an industry.
But it's hard to, like, the world can only support a fairly small number of esports.
Right.
But there's a lot of multiplayer games.
Right, exactly.
Right. So, you know, what's the end game? Like, what are we trying to do for games? Like, what's the end game of a AAA game like this?
Yeah, exactly. Where's this trying to go? Well, you know, that's interesting because I wanted to kind of, I think as we sort of begin to wrap up a little bit, I wanted to sort of talk about some of the, you know, interesting ideas around sort of local games happening in Toronto.
Yeah, of course.
So one is kind of a adventure game that is coming up about Lost Rivers. And this is an organization I've worked for in the past that talks about underground rivers in Toronto and all of that. Environmental organization. And the game is actually designed around a story where the characters go and discover a lost river during a water crisis in a futuristic Toronto that's experiencing climate change. So for me, that's kind of interesting because, you know, that would be classified as an indie title. I would assume. I don't assume many people outside of Toronto are going to necessarily play it. I hope people inside Toronto actually play it. But for me, it's kind of interesting because it sort of reminds me of some of the educational games I played growing up. And these were about like Save the Rainforest and stuff like that. Pretty basic stuff. But, you know, I'm wondering if, you know, as sort of the climate crisis gets more real and gets more tangible in gaming markets and in people who can afford to play games, like, is that going to impact the way games are played or the type of games that come out? You know, these are just interesting questions I don't really know the answer to.
You see real issues in movies.
Yeah.
You see real issues in books.
Right.
In audio.
Probably in games, right? Yeah.
How often do you play games where you're really confronting real issues?
Yeah. You know, and that's what I was also excited about Cyberpunk for, because I felt like it might touch on real issues.
On the future,
you know?
Futuristic game.
Exactly. And for me, because it's kind of brings up that idea, especially, you know, games I think have you know, if they are sort of trying to reach into that future, like a Fallout is, or a Deus Ex is, or, you know, a Cyberpunk is, you know, one of the things they kind of play with is William Gibson and Neuromancer, and some of his ideas are, you know, the future's not evenly distributed. It's partly already here. It's partly the culture that we are influenced by that determines the future. It's not some far off thing, right? So, you know, how do video games like kind of reckon with things like climate change and the response we as a society need to it, does that require a different game than a first-person shooter? Or, who knows, right? Like, I'm just kind of interesting because as you talked about a lot, we're kind of embedded in these certain types of trajectories. Like, what's it going to take to disrupt them?
Well, and I'm thinking of, like, because you were playing, I keep messing up the name. Running Dogs?
Oh, Sleeping Dogs.
Sleeping Dogs.
Sleeping Dogs, yeah.
You were playing Sleeping Dogs, and you let me play a little bit the other day. And, it's the same control scheme as always.
Yes,
like
exactly.
I sat down, just...
You were ready to go.
Just smacked people.
Yeah.
That's something, that sort of focus.
Yeah.
That sort of place where you're in a game where everything's so familiar.
Yeah.
Where you're just ready to go, where your skills from old games, from playing Arkham Asylum,
right?
Which is similar combat,
exactly.
From playing GTA, which is similar movement,
right?
How do you translate that sort of thing into a new world where things have changed?
Right.
Like when the basic objectives and the basic way you interact with the games are so set,
right?
Like how do you put sort of new ideas into this old context into a way that indicates that those new ideas have radically changed?
Right.
Because frankly, you could have a game set in a world where climate change was happening, and I feel like if the gameplay itself was basically unaffected, players would find it difficult to notice.
And that's the point, and that's exactly it, because just like, to stand out, a game needs to really, if it's going to confront something like climate change or even other crises or issues that are going on right now, it's kind of the same question that society and other institutions that are embedded in the real world have to deal with too. It's like, we can't keep running the same way. We have to change. We have to adapt. And I think perhaps it takes these other institutions to change, and therefore like the way we live our lives to change before we see games change.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just interesting. Yeah.
So to round it off, what do you think you're going to see in games in the future, man? What would you like to see?
Oh man, so one is pretty simple. I want to see this Lost River game take off.
Yeah.
So I want to see what that is like. And then I'd also like to see if games interact with the physical environment in a different way. And, I'd love to see if they deal with climate change directly and in a way you said, where they actually deal with it in a different way than the mold that we currently have.
Where it exists as some sort of mechanic.
Exactly. How about you? What would you like to see, or what do you think you'll see in 5 years?
I mean, I'm always... I'm fascinated by esports, by games in sort of a meta way. I really want to see sort of how the industry as a whole reacts to the fact that there's so much that we can put in a game now.
Yeah.
That we have all this stuff inside of games. What I want to see what makes it. What things get cut. Are we still in 5 to 10 years? Is every game still a first-person shooter?
Right.
Do we have? Is there like a new mechanic?
Right.
Because there've been kind of new aspects of games, like battle royale games. You fly above a map, everybody drops in, the map gets smaller. Like that's not really a new mechanic in the same way.
Right.
That's a whole game type.
Right.
It's very hard to take that game and then make a game that's radically different with
still using ASW.
Exactly.
SWD, exactly.
You're still with a we touched on crafting systems.
Right.
It's super easy to import that to other games.
Right.
I want to see what the next big thing like that is.
Right. Exactly.
And, I want to see a AAA game that releases and isn't a total crapshoot. That shows up and everybody agrees that this is a great game from day one.
Yeah.
That would be cool.
That would be really cool.
Don't know if that's ever going to happen.
Hopefully, yeah.
All right, buddy.
All right, man. Good one. We'll sign off for now. Till next time.